The Superior Township Jane Doe, identified as Cheryl Lynne Coates. This story begins in Superior Township, Michigan, in January 1985, when remains were found in a shallow grave. The woman was buried near the Woolman Oval Apartments, which were abandoned in the 1970s, and they've since been torn down. The police quickly determined they belonged to a woman who was likely near legal age, upwards to the age of 25. She was wearing a winter coat. She was probably about 5'1" or 155 centimeters and around 105 pounds or 48 kilograms. She had on 2 sweaters and a heavy winter coat, as well as size 4 jeans. She'd likely been there only a few months before she was found. They believe she passed probably between January of 1984 and January of 1985. Her COD was identified as being a wound. They would begin to circulate a forensic sketch that depicted what she may have looked like, and they would enter her into NamUs in hopes that someone missing her would see her listed as being found. I was unable to locate the forensic sketch. However, it wasn't the only depiction that was done. It would not be until Othram Labs became involved that they would find her cousin. And then they finally had answers, and Cheryl Lynne Coates was officially found. Cheryl was just 25 and had been living in either Southfield or the Detroit area of Michigan when her life was taken. She was known to spend time in both areas. The fact that she had on multiple clothing items made the police believe she may have been homeless at the time. However, the police really need someone to come forward to explain what her circumstances were at the time to try to figure out who did this. Her mother, Meta Waller, passed away in the attacks on September 11, 2001. She was sitting at her desk in the Pentagon when a jet struck the building. It was her cousin's DNA in that case that would identify our Jane Doe's mom. That same cousin would help identify Cheryl Lynne. She would go on to say how shocked she was to learn that Cheryl had been gone all of that time, stuck in limbo as a Jane Doe since 1985, saying, "I just think of all the time we've been wondering what happened. Where is she? Is she alive?" She would say they come from a storied family. Her great-grandmother, who Cheryl's mother was named after, was Meta Warwick Fuller, who was a famous African-American sculptor. Their great-grandfather, Dr. Simon Carter Fuller, was actually the first African-American psychiatrist in the United States. Meta herself would become the special programs manager for the administrative assistant to the Secretary of the Army at the Pentagon. The thing that mattered to her mom the most was what happened to Cheryl. She would say her mother especially never got over it, and the most disheartening thing was discovering that Cheryl had been found where she went missing. She would say she was right here all of the time, saying she lives only 15 minutes away now from the wooded area where Cheryl was found. They do ask that anyone who knows anything about this case call the county tip line at 734-973-7711. It's obviously not enough just to give her her name. She deserves justice also. Cheryl Lynne Coates went unidentified for 38 years. Had she lived the life she deserved, she would be 63 years old today. The West Palm John Doe, January 1985. Identified as Terry Ketron. We begin today in Lake Worth, Florida, in a wooded area near Pine Grove Stables, and this was on January 13, 1985. This is addressed in some articles as West Palm Beach, Florida. Children were out playing in a wooded area where they discovered what ended up being a shallow grave. This was near what is described as the LS9 Canal. The kids ran back and told their parents, who in turn would call the police. They would estimate the man had been there for 4 or 5 years. His COD was clear. He'd been hit by what was described as a blast to the chest, and pellets were still found underneath him. The fact that pellets were found below him indicate this happened in the spot where he was found, as if someone took him out in the woods, dug a hole of 16 inches, and then did what was done. There was damage to the man's shoulder, and they were able to tell that he'd been pretty muscular in life. He had broad shoulders, and he'd had his nose, brow, back, and hand all fractured at one point. He'd also had extensive dental work done. It would take Othram Labs to even find his name. Terry Ketron was 31 when he left his home in Campbell County, Kentucky, in the early 1980s. His family at the time had no idea they'd never see him again. He was traveling to Florida with a woman named either Connie or Bonnie. to visit her family. He would phone home once from the trip saying it wasn't going well. He would explain that he was having problems with both his new girlfriend and her family, and this would be the last time they heard from him. The woman they are looking for, Connie or Bonnie, is seen here. They need her to be identified so that she can be questioned. Of course, it doesn't help either that Terry was 1,045 miles or 1,682 kilometers from his home in Kentucky. That distance always makes things much harder when it comes to identification. The girlfriend so far is the best lead. Please call the number on the screen if you have any idea what happened. Terry Ketron was missing for 43 years, and he was an unidentified John Doe for 38. Had he lived the life he deserved, he would be 74 years old today. The Carrollton, Kentucky John Doe, identified as Kenneth Linville. We begin in this case on September 1st, 1980, in Carrollton, Kentucky. Floodwaters had receded on the Ohio River near the town of Carrollton. It was here the remains of a person were found on a riverbank, but they were incomplete and skeletal. It would take over 2 months, and on November 11th, 1980, more remains were actually found on the riverbank behind the Kentucky Utilities plant in Ghent, Kentucky. This is approximately 7 miles or 11 kilometers from where the first remains were found. They had no way at the time of proving they belonged to one person, although they long suspected that they did. Finally, in 2005, they were able to do DNA on both of the remains, confirming they were in fact one man. However, they still had no idea who the man was, even after a reconstruction was done. In May of 2017, a tip would come in that suggested the remains were that of a missing constable named George Hawkins. George disappeared years earlier in 1961, and it's believed it was related to the mob. And the tip that would come in would say the reconstruction had a really close resemblance to George Hawkins. And if you look at the photos here, it's really easy to see why that conclusion was made. 4 days after George went missing, his vehicle had been found parked at the edge of a river in Dayton, Kentucky. His keys were left in the ignition, so it's possible someone dumped the vehicle and hoped that it would be stolen, and the vehicle was a red herring. George has never been found, and there were whispers that he was doing business with the mob, and his disappearance was retaliation. So they thought they may have George, but they still needed to do genetic genealogy. And in came Othram Labs, who got their funding through Project Justice. It was concluded on December 23, 2023, that the man actually wasn't George Hawkins. Instead, it was Kenneth Linville, who was 40 when he went missing from Bethel, Ohio. Bethel is about 81 miles or 130 kilometers from where he was found, in Carrollton, Kentucky. So this was about an hour-and-a-half drive away. He was actually missing less than 2 weeks before he was found. We know now that Mr. Linville had spent many years going in and out of psychiatric institutions. He was admitted to a psych hospital on at least 6 occasions. I always feel like mental health is so important, and if there's anything I can add, I want to do that. I actually wrote a research paper in college on deinstitutionalization, which in 1950s, a major shift happened. They used to pretty much just put mentally ill people in a hospital, and they were often pretty awful places. But with new medications and new treatment, there was better outlook, and they basically just let people out of the institutions. Many of these people weren't prepared for being on their own, and it just created a rotating door of people going in and out. And since then, we seem to have more options, but less funding. And in this case, Ken was last discharged on August 22nd, 1980, and this was less than 2 weeks before he was found. No COD was able to be determined. We keep cutting funds for mental health support, and it just sets people up for failure. I was doing outreach at a homeless shelter, and this was in maybe 1996, 1997. In this case, she was schizophrenic, and I had found her sitting outside, shaking because she believed people were trying to hurt her. So I picked her up, took her to the local mental health center, and it was decided by the crisis therapist that she needed to end up in the hospital. So, long story short, I had to call the managed mental health care plan and beg them to let her be put into the hospital. Now, mind you, I have all these professionals behind me agreeing this needs to happen. However, the company, at least in my state, was given a pool of money and they get to keep it if they don't use it all up. And they refused to allow her to be hospitalized. They said she wasn't a danger to herself or others. She was very much not doing okay. And by now, I'm maybe 4 hours in. I had canceled everything and was trying to get this taken care of. Waiting for callbacks, doing what I needed to. I tried to get her into the group home. She was too sick for the group home. They wouldn't take her because they said she was a danger to the other people because of how ill she was and what was going on. So she was not ill enough for the hospital, too sick for the group home, and a danger to others there. It's absolutely ridiculous. I was almost in tears, honestly. This poor woman, I was able to do nothing for her. I even went back to the homeless shelter and called and spoke to her family in another state. There was absolutely nothing that I could do for her. And the job I had as a case manager doesn't exist anymore because a bunch of mental health funds were cut in 2017 in order to balance a budget off of some tax cuts. And this isn't about politics in any way, shape, or form. What it's about is people, and it's something that is really important to keep in mind because things are not going to get better until we decide to treat the mental health needs of people in our communities. I wish I knew more about Kenneth's life, though in a way I feel like I know him already. And sadly, even though this happened to Kenneth in 1980, it's probably still happening today. Kenneth Linville went unidentified for 43 years. Had he lived, he would be 83 years old today. Huge thanks for watching all the way to the end, and a big thanks to all of you who consistently like and comment on the videos. Whether you leave a full comment or an emoji, it makes a huge difference. So if you consistently watch my videos, maybe take a moment to subscribe. It's a huge push toward the videos being suggested to new people. The next goal is 20,000. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other.